Gentlemen, what is going on today? My name is Ryan Mickler. I'm the host and the founder of the Order of Man podcast and movement, and I want to welcome you here. If you're new to the podcast and this is the first time joining us, I want to tell you really quickly that this is your Friday Field Notes. You get to hear from me on some things I've been thinking about and things that have been bouncing around in my brain for the past week or so. We've also got our interview show. I'm interviewing guys like Jocko Willink and Grant Cardone and Andy Frisella and Tim Kennedy and Dakota Meyer. And we had Ben Shapiro on, we had Steve Ranella on. The lineup of men is phenomenal. So you're going to get a great interview. I'm improving my skill set, and the quality of guys that we're having on is improving as well. So make sure you check those out every Tuesday. And then we've got our Wednesday show, which is an Ask Me Anything. So we field questions from our exclusive brotherhood, the Iron Council. And we also field questions from our Facebook group, which you can find at facebook.com/groups/Order of Man. Before I get into the topic today, which is how we can address and stop these school shootings that continue to take place, let me just first and foremost say that we've got our Iron Council, which is our exclusive brotherhood that is open for registration. We shut it down for a little over a month. We've been building some infrastructures and systems in place so that we can help the almost 1,000 men in the Iron Council accomplish more in 2022 than maybe they have in their entire lives. But we also want to make onboarding more efficient and effective for those of you who are going to band with us. So we built in those systems as well. So we're going to be open for probably, I anticipate, another week. We've had about 75 or so people join us here in the last little while. And I imagine that in the next couple of days, we'll bump that up to 100 or so, and that's when I cap it off. So if you're interested in banding with other men, about 1,000 of us, and tapping into the knowledge and the frameworks and the systems and tools we have to crush 2022, then join us at orderofman.com/Iron Council. Again, that's orderofman.com/Iron Council. All right, guys. So let's talk about some school shootings. So a couple of weeks ago, we had this latest shooting in a school in Michigan, and it looks like 4 people have died. Four students have died, and then many have been wounded and hurt. And so I thought we'd address this because there is a reoccurring theme with a lot of these school shooters, and that's a lack of a father in their lives. Now, I think with this last shooter, I think his father was available or is present in his life. I think his folks are still married, and so they're still around, but I think generally speaking, I'm not sure how engaged his father was. I'm not going to jump to conclusions on that, but I think there is a need for a strong, righteous, and that's different, masculine presence in a young man's life, because it is men. Let's talk about it and call it like it is. It is young men who are doing these school shootings. And so we got to do something about it. We really do. This can't happen anymore. And I think the knee-jerk reaction is to jump to the conclusion that we should just ban guns and there should be more restrictions. There's some things that maybe we can talk about, but banning guns is not an option. It's not something that I'm even willing to negotiate with, because when you start banning guns, then there's other unintended consequences, or maybe intended based on who's proposing banning guns, that will come into play that I'm not interested in. I think that we have the right to bear arms as American citizens, and it's to keep our government in check. It's not for hunting, although that is a use. It's to keep ourselves and our rights from being trampled on by those who would love nothing more than to control you and own every facet of your life. And those guns, those keep that at bay. So there is a reason why we have the right to bear arms. And there's a reason why I would never advocate for the elimination of firearms. So there's some other things that I do want to talk about here. And we as men have the responsibility as potential gun owners to take care of, to teach and all these kind of things. So let's talk about this. Number one is, guys, we need to teach proper firearm safety to our children. If you're going to have a gun in the house, you better teach them what a gun is. You don't need to hide it from them. You don't need to make it some mysterious thing that they can't have access to, because we all know that curiosity kills the cat. You need to expose them to it. All right. You need to ensure that they know what firearms are, that they know what they do, what they're intended for, that they've actually shot these firearms. They can feel it. They can see it. They can be exposed to some degree the consequence of putting a piece of lead through another person and or an item or a metal target and actually know what it's like to operate these things. I think the more that we keep them from our kids and the less we talk about them and the more that we try to keep them a secret and keep them away from our children, the more that they're going to be curious about it and they're going to find information about it. And when they find information about it, it's not going to come from you, the direct source, the individual, the man who it should come from. If they're learning about these things, whether it's firearms or drugs or alcohol, pornography, sex, from anybody but you, man, you're doing your kids a huge, huge disservice. What a pathetic waste that is, that you have access to information, and because you're afraid and you're worried about their delicate feelings or their innocence, which to a degree, you should be, but that's different than the conversation I'm having. You need to expose them to these things. For example, here's another analogy or an analogy is you're not going to not teach your kids to swim and just keep them away from pools. What are you going to do? You're going to teach them how to swim so that when they're in front of a pool or they fall in, it isn't the first time they've ever been exposed to that environment. And the same is true about firearms. If you've got firearms in your house, whether it's pistols, rifles, shotguns, etc., and you're not exposing them to that, then you're failing. You're failing. You've got tools in the house, and that's what firearms are, and you're not teaching your kids appropriately. I'm not going to teach my 2-year-old, for example, how to hold a firearm, but my 5-year-old, can my 5-year-old shoot a 22? You bet your ass he can. He's going to do it under supervision. He's going to do it with me right there, probably holding the rifle. But a 5-year-old can shoot a 22. A 5-year-old can experience that. It's not going to hurt the child. And then you graduate from there. You maybe move into an AR-15. And even in spite of some of these weenies who, pretend like it's the end of the world, this big explosion and their shoulder hurts and the smell, it traumatizes them from an AR-15. That's a ridiculous thing. Those things don't hurt at all. So a young child, a 7-year-old, an 8-year-old, a 9-year-old can certainly shoot an AR-15 without having some sort of traumatic experience if you as a father is there. You might move into a 410 shotgun. My young teenager, had the first shotgun he had was a 410. Now we moved him up to a 20 gauge, and now he can shoot my 12 gauge just as well, if not better than I can. And he's 13 years old. So if they're going to be around, and they are, and you're not going to get rid of them, whether you like it or not, they're going to be around. They're going to come across one. When I was little, I was out in the street, and I saw this revolver in the street, and I picked it up, and I thought it was a cap gun. And I brought it inside. It was heavy. I was like, man, this is heavy for a cap gun. I must have been 8, 9, 10 years old. Brought it inside, and I showed my mom. She's like, let me see that. Well, it turns out that was a real gun. Now, obviously, it's unfortunate that that thing was in the middle of the street in a neighborhood that was densely populated with children, but it just goes to show you that there might be a moment where our children are presented with firearms, and they better be somewhat familiar with firearm safety rules, procedures. Make sure you're locking them up, but don't hide them, expose them to it. And the more they're exposed to it, the more training they have, the better off it's going to be. And the less likely it is that they're going to need to scratch this curiosity that they have with regards to your firearms. All right. Number 2, watch your damn kids. All right. If you don't know what's happening in your kids' lives, shame on you. If you don't know who their friends are, you don't know where they're going, you don't know what they're doing, that's your fault. That's your failure as a parent. And if you're not doing that, then what the hell are you doing as a father? Because you're not doing your job. That's for sure. We had a young kid in Utah. In fact, he was in our neighborhood, and he ended up taking a homemade bomb to something that he had built in his garage to a school. And the way that I understand it from the reports, and I went through them a lot. In fact, I taught this young man in our church congregation and organization. He's a very strange and awkward kid. I didn't know that he was going to attempt to kill innocent children. So it's hard to know at times for sure, but he took this homemade bomb that he had fashioned, and he brought it and he tried to detonate it in the cafeteria of a school, a local school. Fortunately, the thing malfunctioned. It just smoked. It didn't blow up or explode or hurt or injure anybody. But how in the world is a child? He must have been, I can't remember exactly, but he must have been 14, 15 years old, maybe 16 tops. How can a child build a bomb in his garage and parents not know what's going on? What in the hell is happening? We are at such a lack of fatherhood in this world that kids are literally building bombs in their garage and parents don't know what's happening. Come on now. Like, something's got to change there. Not to mention, these kids are watching porn. They're sending each other inappropriate texts. They're doing drugs. They're drinking. How do you not know that's happening? It's unfathomable to me that a parent wouldn't understand that. So guys, like, parent your child, be involved in their life. Maybe don't work as much as you currently are. Maybe ask some questions. Maybe have dinner at the dinner table so you can ask about your kids' lives. Maybe know what's going on under your own damn house. What kind of man are you if you don't even know what's happening under your own roof? That's despicable. So guys, watch your kids. Watch other kids, by the way, in the community too. You know, a lot of these active shooter kids, like, there's warning signs. They're posting stuff on their social media accounts. They've had run-ins with the law. They've already had issues with school. Like, why aren't we watching these kids? Because we want to turn a blind eye and we don't want to ruffle any feathers. We want to make sure nobody gets offended. And then somebody gets killed because we're unwilling or incapable of doing our job as men. Number 3, this one's a little different because, look, there's kids in your community who you don't have any control over, right? So although you might be doing all the right things, you're teaching your kids about firearm safety and the firearm rules, and you're exposing them to firearms in general, you're watching them, you're a good steward over your kids and your household, and you know everything that's going on, and they're on the up and up. There's things that are beyond your control, which is other kids who don't have the luxury of having a permanent father figure like you in their life. I can't control what these kids do. I couldn't control what that kid did. I mean, I was teaching him, for crying out loud, every Sunday, every Tuesday night, and I can't control what he's doing. So you better damn well teach your kids situational awareness, because there's some real threats. And if you're packing your little boy or little girl in a Transformer or My Little Pony backpack, those are probably outdated at this point, and you're sending them off to school and you're not telling them about how to deal with themselves, how to look for threats, what to do in situations, what to do in threats, man, you're screwing up. What a shame. And it would be easy to say, well, I shouldn't have to. I agree. I don't want that to happen. I don't want this to happen to any child or any family. I never want a parent to experience that. But what I want is not always in alignment with what reality is. And so if you don't want your child to be exposed to this, one thing I'd do is I'd consider homeschooling your children. That's something I've been an advocate for years now. We can talk more about that, and I have on other podcasts. But if you are going to send your kids to school, and even if you're not, you should teach them about situational awareness. You should teach them about emergency preparedness. You should teach them about how to cover and conceal and move effectively. You need to expose them to this stuff. Like, if you're going to put them into a threatening situation, you probably ought to make sure they're prepared. It sucks. It's unfortunate. In fact, it's tragic that this conversation needs to be had, but it does. So your desire for this utopian society, although very nice, doesn't match with reality. There's other companies out there I've seen who have plate carriers that you can put in backpacks. Not a bad idea. Again, teaching them about firearm safety and firearm rules so they know the consequences of it. But man, situational awareness, run through drills, run through procedures, teach them about cover and concealment, and keep them safe. If you're going to ship them off to government schooling, keep them safe. That's your responsibility. Nobody else is going to do it. School teachers aren't going to do it. Bless their hearts. They're not adequately trained. They don't have any weapons. They don't have firearms to defend themselves and their students. They want to, I'm sure they want to make sure their kids are safe. I have no doubt about that, but they're incapable of doing so. because we don't allow them to do it, which leads to my next point, that we ought to consider giving our school teachers some training, training in situational awareness, training in threat prevention, hell, even potentially training with firearms, and allowing school teachers to carry firearms. And if we're not going to do that, then we ought to secure our schools. I know there's plenty of men who are former law enforcement officers, former military members, who would be willing to either volunteer to run security at schools, or be paid to do it, because we as taxpayers, again, if we're going to ship our kids out, I think we probably ought to keep them safe. So why don't we have security guards? Why don't we have trained fathers, trained members of society who are in there and keeping our kids safe? Why aren't we training school teachers? Why aren't we allowing school teachers to carry? Like, you have a right as an American citizen to carry a firearm, barring some crimes or some minor exceptions, but like, you have a right to do that. So why do we strip that right away from a school teacher? Now, does there need to be some training? Yeah, I think there should. I think they should prove that they have some level of competence and proficiency with a firearm if they're going to be in there. But damn, like, there's other people with firearms. Don't you think it'd be a good idea to arm the good guys with firearms? So let's give them some training. Let's make sure they're proficient. You ask your teachers to have degrees that prove to some element that they're capable of teaching young children. So we can do the same with firearms. We can bring school people in, or security in. We can bring fathers in. We can do all of that. And we should be doing all of that, because it's clear there's a threat and we need to be able to deal with it as men. So far we've got teaching your kids firearm safety. We've got watch your kids, make sure you know what's going on in their lives and who they're around and what they're doing. You've got number 3, teaching situational awareness to your children and providing them with what they need to stay alive in this dangerous, potentially unfortunate, well, it's not even potential, it is an unfortunate, tragic situation. And I don't want kids to come across that. But if they are, I want them to be protected. And then number 4 is, let's arm school teachers. Let's have security detail there at the school to be able to protect our young little ones. And the last one, guys, here is just get involved in your community. If you're going to, be running security, for example, in one of these schools, if that's an option, if you can teach young men in your neighborhood, if you can coach these young men on football or basketball or wrestling or baseball team, if you can lead a young men's ministry through your local church, whatever you can do to get involved with these young men. And again, it's young men who are doing this. And so many of these kids, and it's not an excuse and it doesn't make it okay, but so many of these kids do not have father figures in their lives. And you, as their baseball coach, might be the only stable, permanent fixture, manly fixture in their life. And that might just be enough to teach them about sacrifice and honor and integrity and working hard, and take them from a path that they were on, a horrible, tragic, negative path they were on, and put them on the right path of being the kind of men that we need society to be self-sustaining, self-sufficient, confident young men who are going to move forward in their life in confidence and have their own family and do for their family some of the same things that I'm talking about with you today. We got to have these conversations. And again, I'm not willing to sacrifice my right to carry a firearm because of this threat. But there are other ways to deal with these threats. And there's 5 of them right there. And so I would encourage you to implement these in the walls of your own home. Talk with your school boards, run for office, run for school boards so you can talk about these things, run for office at the state and county level so that you can administer or issue or introduce some of these bills that will keep our kids safe and protected and give them a fighting chance. And in the meantime, we got to work on how we're going to fix these young men who continue to do this. They're lost. You see them, they're lost. Soulless, dark eyes and menacing stare. They're just dead inside. And that's our failure too. That's society's failure. We're talking about all sorts of things in society about what's wrong with school shootings and what's wrong with it, but we're not talking about mental illness. We're talking about COVID, but we're not talking about physical health. We're talking about the band-aids. We're not talking about the solutions to the actual problem. And the solution to actual problem is taking men who are manly, who've learned how to harness these masculine tendencies into productive outcomes, and then teaching them to the young men who need them, who maybe don't have the luxury of having that kind of man in their life. We got to do better, guys. We can do better. And this is how we start. So get involved, teach your kids firearm safety, get them introduced to guns, watch them, know what's going on in their lives, help them with situational awareness, arm our school teachers, or at a minimum, provide security. I don't want that. I wish that wasn't the case, but it is. So let's do it. And then make sure that you're involved at the deepest level you can within your community. We've got a lot of work to do, guys. Let's make it happen. Let's keep our kids safe. Let's create and build an amazing, thriving society. We'll be back next week. Until then, go out there, take action, and become the man you are meant to be.